Today we are going to learn about the human circulatory system. Let us see the components of circulatory system. There are three components. They are the heart, the blood and the blood vessels. And we know that there are three types of blood vessels. They are arteries, veins and capillaries. Now coming to the function of circulatory system, we know that it is concerned with circulating the blood. For what purpose? To deliver oxygen and nutrients to every part of your body. And we all know that our cells require oxygen and nutrients to produce energy. So it is the circulatory system which is circulating the blood in order to deliver oxygen and nutrients to every part of your body. And in this diagram you can see that the right side of your heart is receiving deoxygenated blood. Deoxygenated blood is a blood which lacks oxygen in it. So, when the deoxygenated blood is reaching the right side of the heart from the veins, it is pumped to the lungs for oxygenation. Whereas the left side of the heart is receiving oxygenated blood from the lungs and they pump it to the different parts of your body through arteries. And here the blue color indicates the deoxygenated blood and red color indicates oxygenated blood. Now let us learn more about the structure of heart. Our heart is a hollow and a muscular organ. And if you look at the shape, it is somewhat conical in shape. And outside, you can see the heart is covered with a double-walled membrane, and this membrane is called pericardium. The space between the pericardial membrane we call pericardial space, and it is filled with a fluid called pericardial fluid. What is the function of this pericardial fluid? It will protect your heart from shock. Now look at the location of your heart, the position of your heart. It is placed in the thoracic chamber in between two lungs. And this region between the two lungs where the heart is located, we call it as mediastinum. Now let us see the various chambers of a heart. When we look at the internal structure of human heart, we know that it is four-chambered. And this muscular organ, our heart, is four-chambered and it will pump the blood. Let us see more about the chambers, and the chambers are right atrium, which is on the right side, right ventricle, which is on the right side, and left atrium and left ventricle, which is on the left side. So the upper two chambers we call them as atria. The plural is atria and singular is atrium. So the upper two chambers are called as atria, and you have two lower chambers, and if you look at the lower chambers, they are much thicker. You can see it is more thick here. So the two lower chambers, we call them as ventricles. So on your right side and on your left side you have ventricles. And if you look at these four chambers, we can say that the left side as well as the right side of the heart are separated by a muscular wall of tissue. This muscular wall of tissue is separating the right side and your left side of your heart. And this thick muscular wall, we call it as auriculoventricular septum of our heart. auriculoventricular septum. It is the septum which is dividing the right side and the left side of the heart. It's also called between the two ventricles. If you see the septum, that thick wall, we call it as interventricular septum. If the septum is there between the auricle and the ventricle, we call it as auriculoventricular septum of heart. So this is a brief idea about the various chambers of the heart. Now let us see the various blood vessels which are connected to our heart. So looking at the blood vessels, I'll just introduce the various blood vessels which are connected to the heart. They are superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, pulmonary veins, pulmonary arteries and aorta. Okay, so we'll see what these various blood vessels are doing. So superior vena cava is the blood vessel. Superior vena cava is a blood vessel which is transporting the blood which is deoxygenated from upper part of your body. So deoxygenated blood is carried from upper part of your body to your heart through superior vena cava. It's actually big veins. And inferior vena cava is also veins which will bring the deoxygenated blood from the lower part of your body to the right atrium. So both these superior vena cava and inferior vena cava are connected to your right atrium. Now next you can see when the blood is filled with here, the blood is reaching, when this chamber contracts, the blood is reaching your ventricle, which is right ventricle, and from the right ventricle the blood is going through an artery called pulmonary artery. So pulmonary artery is actually carrying deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to your lungs. So pulmonary artery is taking the blood to your lungs. And in the lungs, we know that oxygenation of blood takes place. When oxygenation is taking place, the oxygenated blood is returning back to your heart through pulmonary veins, which is on the left side and on the right side. So both sides you have the pulmonary veins which are connected to your left atrium, and it will bring oxygenated blood from the lungs. And from this left atrium, the blood is pumped to the left ventricle, and this oxygenated blood which is there in the left ventricle is going to the different parts of your body through aorta. So this is the aorta through which the blood is going to different parts of your body. That too, which kind of blood? The oxygenated blood. So this is a brief idea about the various blood vessels of your heart. So I repeat, you have the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, which are the veins, and they carry deoxygenated blood from upper part and lower part of your body to the right atrium. And you have the right pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary artery is carrying the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the lungs for oxygenation. And after oxygenation, the blood is returning to your left atrium through pulmonary veins. And from the pulmonary veins, once it reaches the left atrium, the blood is pumped to left ventricle, and the oxygenated blood is going to the different parts of your body through aorta. Now let us see what are heart valves. The valves are structures which helps in the unidirectional flow of blood. That means when the blood is moving from one chamber to other chamber, there should not be backflow of blood. So to prevent the backflow of blood and allow only one directional flow of blood, we have heart valves. Let us see the major heart valves of your body. We can see that on the right side, that is in between the right atrium and right ventricle, you have a valve which is called tricuspid valve. Actually, these valves are acting as doors. So it can open and shut. So Tricuspid valve is a valve which is present between the right atrium and right ventricle. Similarly, on your left side, between the left atrium and left ventricle, you have a bicuspid valve. Bicuspid valve is also called as mitral valve. So on the right side you have the tricuspid valve, and on the left side you have the bicuspid or mitral valve, which will allow only one directional flow of blood and will not allow the back flow of blood. Now you can see that there are other two valves called the aortic semilunar valve and pulmonary semilunar valve. What is the role of a semilunar valve? As we seen earlier, it is the right ventricle which is connected to the pulmonary artery. Initially you have seen in this diagram that the right ventricle was connected to the pulmonary artery. So at the in the junction between the pulmonary artery and the right ventricle, you will have a valve here, and this valve is called as the pulmonary semilunar valve. Similarly, in your aorta also, where it is connected to your left ventricle, you can see there is a valve which will prevent the backflow of blood, and that valve you call it as aortic semilunar valve. So together we can consider there are three types of valves: the tricuspid valve on the right side, bicuspid valve on the left side, and you have semilunar valves which is near to the pulmonary artery and the aorta. Now, if you look at the shapes of these tricuspid, pulmonary valve, semilunar and mitral valve, you can see that why is it called tricuspid? Because you can see there are three cusps, 1, 2 and 3. Since there are three cusps, three folds, we call it as tricuspid valve. Similarly, bicuspid valve or mitral valve is having two cusps, one here and other here. And if you look at the semilunar valves, they are all having a semilunar shape. That's why we call it as semilunar valve. So this is a brief idea about the heart valves, chambers and blood vessels. Now we have to see how the blood is flowing through our heart, the pathway of blood through the heart. So let us learn about that. So here in this diagram, as we already seen, I'm just introducing the various parts of your heart to you. You have the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, you have the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle, you have the aorta, you have the pulmonary artery, and you have the pulmonary veins. And in between the atrium, you have atrial septum. In between the ventricles, you have ventricular septum, and together we call it as auriculoventricular septum. Now let us see the flow of blood, the pathway of blood through your heart. So initially I have said that the superior vena cava is bringing deoxygenated blood from upper part of your body, and inferior vena cava brings deoxygenated blood. It's actually meaning impure blood. So that impure blood from upper part and lower part are brought by superior and inferior vena cava to the right atrium. Once the blood reaches the right atrium, when it is filled with the blood, you know that this chamber will contract. When right atrium contracts, the blood is pushed into right ventricle through tricuspid valve. And now this part, the right atrium will relax, and now the right ventricle will be filled with blood, so that starts to contract. So it is simultaneously, you can see there is contraction and relaxation of the chambers of your heart. Now when the right ventricle is filled with deoxygenated blood, it will contract, so the blood will be pushed into the pulmonary artery through pulmonary valve, semilunar valve. And once the deoxygenated blood enters the pulmonary artery, it is going to your lungs for oxygenation. And once this deoxygenated blood reaches the lungs, it gets oxygenated, and the oxygenated blood is brought back to your heart through pulmonary veins. You can see pulmonary veins here, which is coming from the lungs. Here also, right side and left side, you can see the pulmonary veins which is coming from the lungs, and they carry oxygenated blood. When the oxygenated blood is filled in the left atrium, you can see the left atrium will contract and the blood is pushed to left ventricle through the mitral valve or bicuspid valve. And now you can see the left atrium will be again in a relaxed state, whereas the left ventricle is starting to contract. When left ventricle contracts, we can see that the oxygenated blood enters into the aorta through the semilunar valve here. And when this oxygenated blood is entering into the aorta is taking that oxygenated blood to your different parts of your body. And why you require oxygenated blood to different parts of your body? Because your cells require the oxygen for producing energy in order to do some work. So this is how the overall pathway of blood through your heart. So you have seen, if you can see how the blood is moving, we saw that it's moving from the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava to the right atria, from to the right atrium to the right ventricle, to the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery to your lungs. From the lungs you have pulmonary veins, again coming back to left atrium and then to the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle the oxygenated blood is going to the different parts of your body through the aorta. So this is the overall view of how the blood is flowing through your heart. The normal heart has two sides, the right side and left side, and four chambers. The upper receiving chambers are called atria and the lower thick-walled chambers are called ventricles. The red blood coming from either superior vena cava or inferior vena cava enter into the right atrium. Blood then flows across the tricuspid valve to the right ventricle. Right ventricle then squeezes and ejects the blood into a vessel called pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery splits into two vessels, each going to the lungs. As the blood makes its way through the lungs, it returns through the pulmonary vein to the left atrium. That blood is now oxygenated, picked up oxygen, then goes across the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle, which does most of the work in terms of delivery of blood flow to the body. Now the blood is ejected into the aorta to some organ, muscle, or skin in human. And if you consider one more thing, there are two ways by which the blood is circulating through your heart, and that is why we call the heart as a double pump. So it's called double circulation, and it is made up of pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. So we know that a heart, which is a four-chambered heart, is there connected to various blood vessels, and pulmonary circulation means the blood is going with the deoxygenated blood from your right ventricle is going to your lungs. So you can see here from the right ventricle the deoxygenated blood is moving from like this, and through the pulmonary artery it is going to your lungs for oxygenation. And in the lungs, you know, there are some alveoli and all where gas exchange will take place. So after oxygenation, again the blood is coming back through the pulmonary veins and then it is reaching your left atrium. This circuit we call it as pulmonary circulation. So when it is connected to the lungs, we use the term pulmonary. So from the right ventricle through the pulmonary artery to the lungs, and from the lungs the oxygenated blood is coming to your left atrium. This circulation of blood we call it as pulmonary circulation. And then what do you mean by systemic circulation? Systemic circulation means from the left ventricle the oxygenated blood is going through the aorta, and through the aorta it is going to the different parts of your body. Okay, and from the different parts of the body, when the oxygen is utilized, again some waste materials will be produced, and that deoxygenated blood is again coming back to your heart, to your right atrium through the vena cavas. So this circulation we call it as systemic circulation. So I hope you understood. Pulmonary circulation is related to your lungs, the circulation which is there, loop which is taking place with your lungs, and systemic circulation is taking place with your body. Like the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle is passing through the aortas, and finally it is reaching the different parts of your body, and again it is coming back to your right atrium. Which blood? Deoxygenated blood through the vena cavas. So together, as we can see here, that the circulation can be of two types: pulmonary circulation, which is transporting the deoxygenated blood from the right side of your heart to where the blood is picking up the oxygen and returning to the left side of the heart. Whereas systemic circulation, you can see that highly oxygenated blood which is there on your left side of the heart is going to all the tissues of your body except lungs. And systemic circulation is removing actually the waste from your body tissues, and it is returning the deoxygenated blood to the right side of your heart. So this blood circulates through the body in two main rounds. The systemic circulation transports oxygenated blood to the tissues and brings deoxygenated blood back to the right side of the heart. Pulmonary circulation transports deoxygenated blood to the lungs and brings the freshly oxygenated blood back to the left side of the heart. Coronary system is a portion of systemic circulation that perfuses heart muscle. So today we have discussed about the circulatory system, structure of heart, how blood flows through the heart, and double circulation. Hope you enjoyed the session and were able to add value to your knowledge about heart. Thank you.